All right, folks, so this is the new COROS VERTIX 2S, the update to their VERTIX 2 sports watch. And the VERTIX 2S is really all about updating their flagship sports watch with their latest heart rate sensor, as well as some optimizations to GPS for increased accuracy basically all around. But another part of this update is that they have new colorways that are kind of centered around this theme of Earth, Moon, and space. Kind of interesting. So the S in the VERTIX 2S stands for, well, actually COROS doesn't even know that, but as we all kind of know, the S moniker in the tech space basically means like a 0.5 upgrade. So not a completely new watch by any means, which is why they didn't call it a VERTIX 3, but just kind of nice upgrades to the most current technology. Oh, and by the way, this is in no way a sponsored video or anything like that, which is what it may look like with all these watches on the table. COROS just really wanted to showcase all the colors, which is kind of one of the big stories behind the VERTIX 2S, which is why they sent out all these media loaners. So the big hardware upgrades on this watch, other than the new colorways, are COROS's latest heart rate sensor, as well as an improved antenna design for their satellite chipset for better accuracy. And of course, I've got tons of examples for you in this video to see if it's actually more accurate than before. But other than that though, the VERTIX 2S is largely the same as the previous generation, even with the same price tag of $699. But the VERTIX 2 is going to be COROS's new flagship outdoor-focused sports watch with a durable titanium case, as well as a sapphire lens for increased scratch resistance. It has crazy long battery life, there's tons of sport profiles, including a good deal of outdoor recreation profiles. It's basically the best watch that you can get from COROS. Now, I've already done my full in-depth review of the original VERTIX 2, which I'll have linked down in the description below, and I don't want to repeat myself too much, but I also do want to make this a full in-depth review. So I'll be covering a lot of features in this video, and especially a lot of the features that came out since the original VERTIX 2 came out. Okay, so starting off, so the VERTIX 2S comes in 3 different colors. A color they call Space, another called Earth, and then one called Moon. So certainly a theme going on with these. Now for the unboxing, I usually don't cover that in my reviews, but I did want to mention that they reduced the packaging significantly here to recycled but also reusable packaging. The original VERTIX and VERTIX 2 came with these rather large hard cases, which were kind of cool and all, but could also be a waste if you didn't have a use for them. So they went with much simpler packaging here, where it has this recycled box that you could reuse for something, I suppose, or you could just go ahead and recycle it if you don't need it. And then inside the box, you get the VERTIX 2S itself, the charging cable, which is a USB Type-A on the charging block end, as well as a color-matched silicone band and nylon band. Now, for the colors themselves, quite frankly, I think they really crushed it when it comes to these colors, and they really carried through the theme with each watch, where nearly everything on each colorway matches, from the bezel to the case to the backplate, down to both the silicone as well as the nylon bands. Like this space color, I really like how it's actually not completely black like the previous VERTIX 2, where it has this kind of really nice shade of gray. And seriously, it's a really cool finish they chose for this space version. And then for the Moon version, so this has a gray theme all around, which I think is pretty unique, and I don't really see this sort of colorway with other watches. But this Earth theme VERTIX 2S has this nice deep blue color to it, and overall, I think they did a really great job with all these new colorways. And I also like the fact that they're much more subtle than the original VERTIX 2, which had some louder accents like the white inlays on the bezel. And then when it comes to the bands, so all of them come with color-matched silicone as well as nylon bands. And in general, nylon bands may be a little bit better suited for sports, as you can get a little more customized fit, and they're also a little lighter, so you do have the option depending on your preference. And then along with all the color-matched hardware bits that come with each version, each one also has a unique watch face that matches the theme of each watch, and they're also animated. The VERTIX 2S is nearly the same as the original VERTIX 2, so it has the same dimensions with a 50mm case. It is just slightly thicker though due to the heart rate sensor, which sticks out just a little bit more, and it still does work with the VERTIX 2 carabiner accessory. And then for weight, again, basically the same as before, and all the 26mm straps are all interchangeable and all that good stuff. And for the display, it has a 1.4-inch memory pixel touchscreen display with 280 by 280 pixels protected by a sapphire lens, as well as the same 3-button configuration, with one of those being COROS's digital dial. However, one difference with the display is that it has an upgraded display panel, and it was pretty noticeable, at least for me, that it has a lot more contrast, where blacks are a lot deeper. Plus, when the backlight is on, it also doesn't have that blue hue to it, which some memory pixel displays can have, like on the previous VERTIX 2. And then when it comes to battery life, so the new VERTIX 2S actually has slightly less battery life than the previous version, and this is just due to the new heart rate sensor that requires more power. Still great battery life overall, but just slightly less across the board in all configurations. And we will see in a bit if that slight hit to battery life is worth it in terms of the heart rate accuracy. And then from a health tracking standpoint, the VERTIX 2S has their latest generation heart rate sensor. It has an SpO2 sensor for tracking blood oxygen saturation levels. It tracks your sleep. It tracks your stress levels 24 hours a day. There's their wellness check feature where you can track multiple health metrics all at one time, and also tracks your HRV trends. And for sleep tracking, I find the VERTIX 2S to do a good job in tracking the time I went to bed, as well as the time I woke up, as well as any interruptions I had throughout the night. Now, when it comes to sleep stages, that can actually kind of be a hard thing to test, and even medical grade equipment is apparently only like 80% accurate, so that's not usually something I cover in my reviews, but the numbers do seem to be in line with most other trackers that I use. Now, when it comes to heart rate and stress tracking, there's a couple of kind of important things to note here, where with stress tracking, if you enable that, it will reduce the battery life a bit. And with heart rate, out of the box, COROS watches are actually set to measure your heart rate every 10 minutes versus in real time. And these are some of the reasons why COROS watches do have some longer advertised battery life than some of its competitors. And I've actually been doing a lot of testing on this front with some other COROS watches like their Pace 3. So be on the lookout soon for an in-depth look at how these settings actually affect battery life in the real world in an upcoming video. And then on the smartwatch side of things, the VERTIX 2S can receive notifications for texts, calls, emails, as well as apps. And what is kind of nice is that you can actually customize what kind of app notifications you receive to an extent on both iPhones as well as Android phones. And then you can also view weather information on your watch that's synced over from your phone. And the VERTIX 2S also has built-in storage for offline music storage and playback with a pair of Bluetooth headphones. Now, the kind of music that you can load up on your watch will be MP3s that you download off your computer. COROS doesn't have any integration with music streaming services like Spotify or anything like that at the moment. There's also some other interesting features that come with the VERTIX 2S, like it's able to connect to some GoPro and Insta360 cameras and act as a shutter control, which is super handy if you want to stop and start recording straight from your watch. When it comes to sport profiles and what kind of sports that you can track, the VERTIX 2S basically has everything that you can think of for a full-featured outdoor-focused sports watch with tons of running profiles, including trail running and track running. There's cycling profiles, there's pool swimming as well as open water swimming, there's triathlon and multi-sport modes, there's gym profiles, including a strength training profile, but there's also a lot of outdoor recreation profiles available like skiing and snowboarding, backcountry skiing, water sports like windsurfing and whitewater profiles, as well as climbing profiles which go way beyond just tracking your heart rate and calories. Like these profiles also can track your approach, your actual climb, as well as the descents. So on the training and performance related side of things, for running, you'll of course get all the typical stats like distance, pace, heart rate, and calories, but it also provides cadence, stride length, as well as running power, all from the wrist without the need for an accessory. And then it'll also provide a training effect for any workout and how it impacted your aerobic or anaerobic fitness. COROS also has a metric called effort pace, and you can basically think of this as what everyone else calls grade adjusted pace, which essentially gives you the equivalent pace that you would be running on flat ground based on the grade of the terrain where you're actually running. And then along with that, they also have what they call a running performance index, which is supposed to illustrate how your most recent workout compares to previous training. And I do feel that it actually does give a pretty good indication of how my last run was. There's also the running fitness metric, which looks at your training in different pace zones to give you an overall score which represents your potential marathon performance. Like for me, I'm certainly more of a shorter distance runner, which is indicated with the kinds of runs that I do, which is why they have me classified as a sprinter. They also have a race predictor for common running race distances that you could potentially achieve based on your previous training. Now, while the half marathon and full marathon predictions look pretty good, the 5K and 10K times aren't so much, as I could probably just go out and nav those times right now, just more on a hard workout and not necessarily a full race pace. Now, on the cycling end of things, COROS hasn't had really a lot on this end compared to what they've had for running at least. It can pair to a power meter, which then you can get metrics like your average power, but the feedback that it gives from there hasn't been as built out as it has been for running. But that is going to be changing soon with some new cycling features such as an FTP test, as well as power related information that's going to be better feeding into your training load. And then on the bigger picture side of things, when it comes to training and performance feedback, it collects your training load as well as time spent in different intensity zones. But one thing to note though is that the cumulative training load that they show on the watch widget is for the current week, like Monday through Sunday. So it's not a rolling 7 days, which I actually tend to prefer. It also provides your training status, so this can be helpful in understanding how your recent training compares to longer term training trends. So they calculate your base fitness, which is a rolling 42-day average of your training load, your load impact, which is a rolling 7-day average, and then they compare the two with intensity trend, which you can use to make sure that you're increasing or decreasing training volume based on your needs. And then they also have a recovery time advisor, and this is based on your recent training as well as recovery like sleep, to give you an estimate of how fatigued you are at the moment and how much time it would take to be fully recovered for a peak performance. And they did recently just make some adjustments to how this is calculated in their recent beta update, and I think for the most part it's reflecting how I actually feel. The VERTIX 2S also comes with offline topo maps, just like the original VERTIX 2, and these are map images that show roads, trails, bodies of water, as well as contour lines, which help provide a lot of context when you're out doing your outdoor activity. Now, these are map images, and what I mean by that is that you can see your position on the map based on your satellite data coming off of your watch, but since these are just images, they don't have stuff like labels for roads or trails, and you also can't reroute with these maps like you can do on a Garmin. But the offline maps still really do help, especially when you're outside of cell phone range, to provide a lot of context, especially when it comes to, let's say, figuring out which fork in the trail to take. And the VERTIX 2S also has 32 gigabytes of storage for all those maps, and all the maps are free, by the way, to download. Now, when it comes to actual navigation, so you'll be able to load up routes using their Explore Route Builder tool in the COROS app, where you can build a route on the fly and then just send it to your watch. And I do find this tool to be very quick and convenient if you need to quickly build in a route. But in addition, though, you can also sync your Strava routes as well as routes from other platforms, and then you can just go ahead and send those over to your watch. There's also their new screen mirroring feature where you can display the data that's being collected on your watch over to the COROS app on your smartphone, and this works for any workout type, whether that's indoors or outdoors. And this particular feature will likely be renamed something else in the future, as screen mirroring isn't quite as accurate, as it actually can do a lot more than that, and it's more of an extension to your watch rather than exactly mirroring the information from your watch. Stay tuned for more details on that in the future, though. Okay, so when it comes to tracking outdoor activities, the VERTIX 2S comes with the same dual-band satellite chipset as the original VERTIX 2. The VERTIX 2, it was like, okay. It was definitely dependable and reliable, but it definitely wasn't the best out there either. But they have done some optimizations to the antenna design on the VERTIX 2S, which is supposed to deliver better accuracy. So let's go ahead and see how that pans out. So on this run, very similar distances with all the devices, including the original VERTIX 2. So all good there, and the GPS tracks also looked very good. So no complaints here, and the VERTIX 2S was solid. Now that was just kind of a fairly easy test around some neighborhoods, but now let's check out some trail running. So on this trail run, a little bit more of a discrepancy between the devices when it comes to distance, but the elevation gain did look good across all of them. Now taking a look at the GPS tracks, the VERTIX 2S was pretty good, but not quite as spot on with the trail at times. It was definitely more accurate than the Apex 2 Pro, but there were just some tighter sections where it didn't have as much detail as some other devices with the same sort of dual band satellite technology. And then moving on to some cycling. So on this ride here, the total distances lined up for the most part with all of the devices. It was ever so slightly more on the VERTIX 2S though, and when we take a look at the GPS tracks in a second, it kind of explains that slight discrepancy. Oh, and the elevation gain was kind of off on all the devices actually, at least compared to the corrected elevation figure in Strava, which is based off their base maps. So maybe just not a great day for all the altimeters on all the devices. Anyways, looking at the GPS tracks, very solid all around, where all the straight line sections were good to go and there were no big misses or anything like that. However, if we take a peek at some of these corners, we notice that the VERTIX 2S as well as the VERTIX 2 actually overshoot these just slightly, which may explain that ever so slight difference in the total distance. The VERTIX 2S is certainly more accurate than the VERTIX 2, but it was kind of interesting to see that both of them did overshoot a bit. So when it comes to GPS, I think it's a good performer. No big misses or anything like that, and it was very consistent. I think the only thing that I'd say is that it can overshoot some corners at higher speeds while cycling, where slower corners were fine for the most part, but it maybe didn't have as much detail as some other devices that I was testing with the same sort of technology. But I will have to say that I do find it to be much more accurate than the original VERTIX 2. And then when it comes to heart rate accuracy, so that's one of the other big upgrades with the VERTIX 2S versus the original VERTIX 2, where the 2S comes with their latest generation COROS heart rate sensor. Now, heart rate accuracy in general is tougher on larger and heavier watches like this, mainly due to the fact that heavier watches have a tendency of moving and bouncing around the wrist due to their weight, which can lead to inaccuracy. So it's good to see an update with this new heart rate sensor, but let's see if it actually pans out. And by the way, on these following examples, I have the VERTIX 2S highlighted in orange. All right, so starting out with some baseline tests here. So here's some steady state indoor cycling. And I don't think we really need to spend much time here because these are solid out of the VERTIX 2S. But how does it compare to the original VERTIX 2? So on this right here, I was wearing the VERTIX 2S on one wrist and the VERTIX 2 on the other. And although the original VERTIX 2 was fine for the most part, other than these little spikes like here and here, it was overall just kind of shakier than the newer VERTIX 2S. However, here's another ride where things weren't quite as hot out of the original VERTIX 2, and by the way, I did actually switch wrist on this ride. The VERTIX 2S did read a bit high at the beginning here, but other than that, the 2S for the steady state rides is really good to go and no complaints. And then moving on to some intervals, that's pretty good as well. We see that it took a minute or two to get a solid lock, and then it had these moments like here and here where it read a few beats per minute high, but other than that, this is pretty great out of the VERTIX 2S. And by the way, these two little blips right here are for my chest heart rate strap when I kind of had to readjust it. And then if we take a look at the intervals themselves, other than this tiny high reading right here, that's basically a mirror image. Now, taking it outside for some cycling, not bad for this kind of ride with both road as well as a bit of gravel. And for the first half of the ride, that's pretty good stuff. On this portion right here, it did start to wander a bit here or there, and this portion was on some gravel where the terrain was a little bit rougher, so that's where watches can bounce around, which can lead to inaccuracies. Still though, I think pretty respectable out of the 2S. Moving on to some running, so this is just a treadmill workout, and that's pretty darn solid, and I kind of had to look hard to see where the VERTIX 2S even differed on this run. It was basically just in between these intervals here where it read a few beats per minute lower than the external monitors, but overall, that's a great job out of the 2S. Now, what's interesting about that run is that I was actually wearing another VERTIX 2S on my other wrist, so two VERTIX 2Ss, and I just kind of wanted to show you this example to illustrate that you can actually get different results from one wrist to another, and a lot of that just has to do with our anatomy, which can differ from wrist to wrist. So that's why you'll see on pretty much all my reviews that I do try to test with different wrists since results can differ. Okay, so now taking it outside for a run. So this is pretty solid out of the VERTIX 2S on my left wrist. A handful of tiny blips over the course of the entire run, but overall, it was solid. But I also was wearing another VERTIX 2S on my other wrist, and again, results absolutely can vary from wrist to wrist. Not terrible from the other wrist, but different results for sure. Now, here's a trail run that I did, and it's definitely not quite as accurate as those runs before, and this is just kind of what I found with trail running since the terrain isn't as smooth and there's a bit more kind of jostling going around. It was never way off, but not quite as spot on either, where it may have been experiencing a cadence lock at times. But I did have this one run right here where that definitely was a cadence lock at the beginning of the run, but it did recover and was better for the rest of the run. Now, when it comes to weight training, the VERTIX 2S performs about the same as most sensors in this department, but just like I say in all my videos, weight training is basically the holy grail when it comes to wrist-based optical heart rate accuracy, just due to all the wrist flexion and all the varying arm movement that can happen during this sort of activity. It's basically a bonus if a watch can do well with weight training, and no bonus for the VERTIX 2S, at least for these two tests. However, this test here actually wasn't that bad other than this blip right here and some wandering here. But just like usual, with weight training and high intensity interval training, if you want the most accurate results, go ahead and just wear an external heart rate monitor. Oh, and on that topic, the VERTIX 2S compared to external Bluetooth sensors like heart rate sensors, power meters, smart bike trainers, stride foot pods, and of course their own Pod 2 where you can get additional running metrics like your ground contact time balance. But just like the original VERTIX 2 and most of COROS's other watches, the VERTIX 2S doesn't have support for ANT+ external sensors, and this really shouldn't be too big a deal in the whole scheme of things, as long as you have an external sensor that supports Bluetooth. But that can be an issue if let's say you own a power meter or smart bike trainer that only has one Bluetooth connection. So what happens there is that, let's say you want to do a ride on Zwift. You'd likely pair your smart bike trainer to Zwift via Bluetooth, but then you wouldn't be able to collect power data on your watch. So with all that, what do I think of the new VERTIX 2S? Well, I'm definitely seeing better accuracy both on the GPS side of things as well as the heart rate side of things. And I'm actually getting pretty decent accuracy overall for a watch of this size and weight for heart rate. Of all the workouts that I did, there really were only a few where I saw some bigger issues, but for the most part, I think it performed pretty well, and it's certainly improvement over the original VERTIX 2. Now, if you already own an original VERTIX 2, I think it could be kind of tough to justify upgrading to this version, although heart rate accuracy could be a reason for that if you're not getting good heart rate accuracy out of your original. Now, if you're thinking about upgrading from an Apex 2, an Apex 2 Pro, or Pace Series watch, I think it's a good upgrade path if you're interested in longer battery life and more durability from a COROS watch. Now, compared to its competitors, probably the closest competitor I can think of is the Suunto Vertical, since they share the same types of maps as well as the same memory and pixel display. It does edge out the titanium Vertical in terms of price, but the titanium version does also have solar charging, which does seem to make a difference when it comes to battery life. Still though, both those watches get incredible battery life at around a month or more depending on your settings. Now for GPS accuracy, I'd give a slight edge to the Vertical, but for heart rate accuracy, it's kind of an easy win for the VERTIX 2S. For the rest of the features though, I'd give an edge to the VERTIX 2S, so when it comes to price compared to the Vertical, I think the 2S is in a good position. Now comparing it with the Garmin gets a bit more complicated since Garmin has so many watches to choose from, but it's probably best to compare it to the Fenix 7X non-pro version or the Enduro 2. But with those two watches, you also get very long battery life, but you do get much more robust mapping capabilities as well as more training and performance feedback. But at full asking price, they're also much more than the 2S. Where it gets tougher is when those watches go on sale, and they do go on sale periodically, but it is nice to see at least that COROS hasn't increased the price of the VERTIX 2S versus the original VERTIX 2. Anyhow, those are just my thoughts on the VERTIX 2S, but I definitely want to hear from you as well. So go ahead and leave your comments down in the comment section down below of what you think. And on your way down there, if you found the information in this video to be useful, do me a favor and just quickly hit that like button and be on the lookout for lots more sports tech videos just like this that are coming soon. In the meantime, go get out there and we will see you in the next video.